How's it? This is Mundo and welcome. This summer I was invited to visit Line 6 in Calabasas, California. And actually it was on the same day. In fact, it was a few hours after my wife, son, and I did the ESP factory tour. In this video you'll get an inside look at the sound design process for the amp models and hear us play through a cranked up vintage Marshall 1968 Plexi. If you haven't already, please subscribe. I have a lot more vids coming up. Besides playing my guitar, I'm going to feature some guitar builders, industry peeps, audio techs, and do more gear demos. Okay, so who hasn't heard of Line 6, right? I've been using their products since 99 or 2000, starting with the Line 6 Pod, or what we used to call the Bean. And now I'm using the Helix 5 nights, 10 shows a week here in Las Vegas. Just my 2 cents, but digital modeling is another tool in our toolbox, and I feel we as guitarists need to embrace this technology alongside with our tube amps and stomp boxes. It just gives us more options, and about 80% or more of my professional work requires me to use in-ear monitors. And Line 6 has been the perfect in-ear solution for me. So I'm really excited to share this video with you. I'll introduce you to Line 6's head sound designer, Ben Adrian, and I'll show you what he does. Line 6 has their own proprietary modeling process, and Ben will show you how intricate that system is. And I'm embarrassed to say I've hardly put any thought into how they've come up with their amp models. Yet I always expect like my Helix to capture all the nuances and respond like the real amps they're modeled on. So now I have a new, deeper appreciation for what goes into each amp model. Prior to meeting Ben, I've heard so much about the vintage amp room. It was a highlight for me to check out this vintage amp museum. Think about it. If you're going to have realistic state-of-the-art amp models, it makes sense to model the real deal. Line 6 owns all of the vintage and modern amps and even stomp boxes of the products they've modeled. It's amp heaven. So Ben let me pick out an amp to try out in their studio, and I chose a 1968 50-watt Marshall Plexi. Actually, a Marshall Plexi Tremelo. In the Larev show where I play in Vegas, I mostly use the Helix's different types of Plexis or modern amps in the Helix that are based on Plexis. And it's cool to push those amp blocks hard, yet still have a civilized volume. Well, here we dimed the amp properly through a 410 cabinet, and it was so loud, it was so glorious. By the way, I've always just accepted the name Line 6, never thought about why it's actually named that. I don't know if you know, but the story goes that the Line 6 founders first had a company called Fast Forward Designs. They helped develop products like Elisa Sadat and I think the Elisa's Quadriverb. Anyway, with the advent of DSP chips becoming cheaper, they started designing guitar-based DSP products in secret. Now, Fast Forward Design's phone system only had 5 lines. So to keep the secret safe, when they got a call where they had to be sensitive to who was on the other line, the receptionist would use the code Line 6 to stop any guitar or amp sound from being overheard. It's pretty cool. If you haven't heard, Line 6 is now owned by Yamaha Music Group, but I didn't know they've also acquired Ampeg.
So it's funny, like everyone thinks this is like the big bass amp. This is like the large, way too big to gig with anywhere bass amp. And it looks kind of like a regular amp now next to the giant thing.
Yeah, for real.
That's a monster.
All right.
Yeah, I think this is anchored to the wall.
Ben Adrian, head sound designer, Line 6, Yamaha Guitar Group. Just going to explain the process of modeling.
So we have a couple software programs that were written in-house. And so here is like the signal routing of the amp, and each one of these blocks does something different. Like we have a tube simulator, we have like EQ filters, we have sag filters so the amp can sag, we have like a power amp tube as opposed to preamp tube, we have the tone stack, and then using these test probes and some gear that we built, this is an old rack thing that we built test gear in, we can clip on at various points in the amp and we send test signals through and we take measurements, and then we can basically match the amp schematic with these blocks. So every time there's a tube stage, we put in a simulation of a stage.
Gotcha.
There's a drive control here is like, you know, corresponds to the level that changes. So we kind of outline the amp here, and then in this, these are all the knobs that you see as a user. And so, for instance, if you're changing the drive knob, you're not only changing a gain stage, but you're also changing the frequency and gain of an EQ.
That makes sense.
And then behind the scenes, what the user can't see, like for instance, here are all the parameters for adjusting, say, a tube gain stage. You have the gain, you have the level, the knee of the top of the waveform, the knee of the bottom of the waveform, the level at which each side clips, if there's any frequency shaping, and then, you know, in an amp model there might be, what is that, maybe 40 blocks.
And so
yeah,
when you're done with this part of it, you're going to basically have your proprietary Line 6 blueprint of that amp.
Yeah.
And then that gets translated to what the consumer sees, and then the block stick.
And then that gets put into the firmware that's in Helix.
Awesome.
So yeah, so every like every couple blocks is another point where we measure on the amp. So every time we do an amp, we might take measurements at like 20 or 30 places along the signal.
Wow.
We measure how the sound changes, and then we match the changes in here. So essentially it's not like a convolution or something. It's every little step that happens as the signal goes through the amp, the same little changes are happening as you go through the model.
Wow.
So that way, when you adjust the tone controls, it behaves like the tone controls on the model, and they happen at the same place. So there's a little bit of distortion before, a little bit of distortion after, you know? And when you adjust the drive, there's a drive knob in here in the same place. It's just digital instead of analog, like in the amp. So, but it's just literally a digitized version of this signal path as close as we can get it.
Cool. So I started with the pod, which has to be more than 20 years ago, right?
I think it came out in 99. So yeah, about 20 years.
And then 2003, I went full Line 6 with the Veta.
Okay.
And all the way to the Helix now. And I can honestly tell you, Ben, I've never once thought about all this. I just think about the knobs on the top.
Yeah, that's all you have to think about. That's what we try to make it. So.
Although the Helix does let you program the sag and stuff like that.
Yeah,
really
there's a sag knob here, which is what you see, and then what's happening behind the scenes is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 places it's changing it in the amp model.
Wow.
So every simulated gain stage has the sag changes when you adjust that one knob. So hopefully you think about one thing and you do it, but behind the scenes it's as if we were changing the whole power supply of the amp.
Oh my gosh.
So.
What is this amp now?
This is an amp called the Rev Generator.
Oh, gotcha.
And in the 2.8 update, one channel came out, channel 4, and now I'm doing channel 3. And we're going to work our way backwards and do all the channels of that amp eventually.
That's cool. Oh my gosh. Super Marshall 415s. Plexi with tremolo. Plexi, these are the amps they use the model. Shoot. How cool is this? That's nice.
So yeah, we'll go through the studio and you'll see more amps.
Fun AC30 before top boost.
Yeah, before the top boost came around. And this is a top boost AC30 that has the next one. Yeah.
What year is that one from over there?
1939, the Gibson. Really? Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
EH185 amp.
EH135.
85.
85. Yeah. You think like a 58 Bassman there.
Something like that, somewhere around there, yeah.
And those Supros back there. They all still work, or?
Oh yeah.
Really?
And like, you know, we pull them out every so often to make sure they work, and we have to like play with them for a little bit, and then part of my job is if they don't, I have to fix them. So,
yeah, that's cool though.
You know, and I just start tearing it apart, but yeah, it's really great getting it going, start all this stuff. There we go. All right.
Are we up?
Yeah.
I put it back in tune. I don't know if it slid back out. But...
Nobody's allowed to play that loud anymore.
No.
Everything is dying. Was it dying when I was playing?
It's close to it now.
That is loud.
Yeah.
It's only 50 watts. I thought it was 100 watts.
Oh, and it just takes off too.
It does.
That's wicked.
But
loud.
it's that sound.
Yeah. No pedals. It's just nothing but level through an old amp.
And where's the master gain? There is none.
There is none. Yeah.
Feel me? Blocks have it.
Is that your spiders to the right. Clowns to the left of me. Whee! So much fun.